Yeah. I guess I'll start. I'm going to have to take this thing off because I can't stand in one spot. Wow, that's sensitive. Hi. All right. So most of my talks in the past have been largely physical. That's kind of my specialty, breaking into buildings. So I kind of focus a lot of my talks on that. Outside of the physical perspective, I did a lot of the technical talks. I kind of left the consulting field a little while ago and took a job as a CISO. So I'm not really doing the cool breaking in stuff anymore. So I kind of want to switch my talks now to focus more on the compliance side and how to actually sell the red team type testing to organizations. Because when I was doing the consulting, I didn't really feel there was a correct selling method. And the red teams weren't really being understood by a lot of the security teams. So this talk actually started out as a fire talk in BSides, Delaware, on a really short notice that there was a slot open, so can you throw something together? And I did. A couple people liked it, so we expanded it out into a 45-minute talk. There's actually 50 slides, so it's going to be kind of interesting. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. There's stuff about me because everyone always asks, what's your background? I'm not really going to go into it. This is me in a nutshell. So I've been on kind of both sides of the security fence, both the IT side and the physical security side. A lot of SAN certifications, OffSec training. I'm a certified bodyguard, jiu-jitsu instructor, teacher. So yeah, I've kind of been all over the field for the past 26 years. And so that's what I do. Nothing I say here should be reflected on my employer. I'm not mentioning who they are, but if you do some Google research, if you're really interested, you can figure it out. Anyhow, off because I can't stand still. There's a lot of text in the slides. I didn't write any of the text. There's a reason for it. A lot of the text on the slides are pulled directly from NIST. There's a reason for it. A lot of the major risk management frameworks that are out there, like PCI, ISO, they're all pulled essentially from NIST. If you look at the NIST controls, they're mapped directly into other risk management frameworks. There's also a lot of confusion on the NIST framework. It's very hard to decipher. So we're going to actually take common risk or common red team testing techniques, tactics, and actually map them into NIST. Just kind of to better understand what those controls are, why they're important, and how we have to actually do the testing to meet those specific controls. So this is it. There's actually 3 risk categories in NIST. There's low, moderate, and high. Most commercial organizations, private organizations, will never actually reach high unless you're dealing with top secret or TS/SCI type data. High doesn't apply. Most commercial businesses are going to be at moderate level. So most of the slides in here that I'm focusing on for testing controls are going to be at moderate. If you meet moderate, you obviously meet low. Most of the slides that are in here, they're going to be based off of child categories of the major families. So if I'm calling CA8, which is certification and accreditation number 8, it'll be CA8-2. If you meet CA8-2, you obviously meet CA8. If that doesn't make any sense when we get to the slide, ask me what it is and I'll explain it better. Because right now it probably doesn't make any sense if you've never seen this before. Alright, so for the technical stuff. This is all the stuff that usually happens from, a sales perspective during a pen test. It's common verbiage for everyone in here. We're testing the web apps, we're testing network devices, we're testing wireless, we're doing OSINT, we're doing phishing, we're doing vishing, all the cool stuff that we like to do when we're breaking stuff. Which is cool, but how do we map it into the red teams? And there's a lot of definitions on what a red team is. If you go to 3 different consulting companies that do red teams, they'll give you 3 different definitions. Down to we red team web apps. I especially love that one. This is NIST definition. My definition of a red team is full scope. It's we will do everything. We'll come on site, we'll pick locks, we'll break doors, we'll own your systems internally, then go back outside and we'll break it again. That's my view of what a red team is, but this is NIST definition. I'm not going to read all the slides to you because it'll waste time, and it's kind of dumb to read the slides. So if I go too fast, ask me to rewind and I'll pull it back. From a testing perspective, and again, we're going to focus specifically on NIST. These are the controls that are going to say a red team, or what type of testing needs to be done. So the first 2 are, do you do security assessments? Okay. So if we do a red team, this is the control that we're going to meet, CA2, certification and accreditation number 2. Right. Is it done by an independent assessor? Which it should be done. In-house red teams are fine, but there needs to be a third party that's actually going to validate what testing was actually done, how the controls were actually implemented. Did you do a penetration test? I don't think I need to explain that one. Did you do a red team? Red teams under NIST actually aren't required unless you're doing a high classification system. However, we can use the red team to actually validate a whole bunch of controls. So using a properly executed full scope red team, you're going to cross over about 6 different control families and like 40 different controls, which we'll go through shortly. Again, a lot of it's very complex, very convoluted, so if something that I say doesn't make sense or the slide doesn't make sense, just raise your hand and I'll try to explain it. But again, there's a lot of data in here, so I'm going to try to blow through this very quickly without speaking too fast. I have a bad habit of doing it. I'm originally from New York City, so we speak fast by nature. We also usually curse a lot. I've gotten better over the years of not dropping the F-bomb in every sentence, especially now it's being recorded, and I don't usually do this. I'll try not to curse. Alright, so starting out with the first control, and I go sequentially. I don't go in order of preference. If I did, I'd start with physical. But I'm trying to go from top to bottom as NIST defines it. So account management. If we pop a system and someone makes an account, because pen testers do that, is there some kind of system place that's going to automatically, without someone actually going onto a system and looking who's logged on, is there some way that system is going to alert something that someone's compromised the system? I know it sounds ridiculous. What does it actually mean? I like Splunk, so if I'm pulling logs into Splunk and Splunk automatically says, hey, an account was created, is there an alert that's automatically generated based on that, we'll say, Windows notification that tells someone, hey, an account was generated? How we do with the pen test? Obviously, if we pop something, we can account, the circle starts. Non-privileged ties back to, AC2. If I create an account and then I elevate privileges or assign myself to an admin account, is there a system in place that's going to detect that? Okay. Again, tying back into any SIM, I can pick on Splunk, that's going to actually detect that activity. So when me as a pen tester pops your box, creates an account, I then add myself to the admin group, it's just some automated functionality that's going to detect that and alert on it and notify the appropriate persons. Admin accounts. I think a couple of other talks today have mentioned this. If someone pops an admin account and starts doing things, there's just some automated notification that those activities are being performed. If I'm logging into 16 different systems within 5 minutes with an admin account, is there something, God I hope so, that's going to notify that this admin account is doing that? If I start doing things like creating services on 16 different accounts within a 5-minute window, is there something that's actually going to notify on that? And these are all tying back to things as the red teams that are common activities. If you go to Spray WMI, for example, the old SMB exec across an entire domain. Common tools that we've all been using. Now, how is it going to tie into what are we going to test with it? So this is how we're testing it. So these are controls we're actually going to test. So again, that's kind of the focus of this. It's not all the controls, but how we're actually going to test the individual controls. So when we want to actually sell a red team to whatever company, and they say, well, how can we justify this? This is what we're going to start breaking down here. I don't think I need to define this one, unsuccessful login attempts. So if I'm brute forcing with Hydra or Metasploit or whatever, is someone getting alerts that, there's 5,000 failed login attempts, which, God, I hope you weren't doing as a pen tester, but it happens. Action permitted without identification or authorization. If I'm starting to forced execution of commands and they're failing, common activities unfortunately on pen test, but is there some automated mechanism that's going to detect for all those actions and notify the appropriate person? Remote access. If by some freak chance you're running PEEP or WEP because you'd be surprised if people are still using it and I get creds and then I start VPNing in, is there something that's going to monitor for VPN activities coming into the network? If I pop an admin account and I try to VPN in, is there something that's going to say, hey, this is bad activity? What's going on? Again, is there some kind of automated notification that's going to tell the network guys, the security guys, whomever, that this is actually happening? What type of encryption is actually being used on the VPNs? Common stuff that we test for in every kind of vulnerability assessment, every pen test. But is there some automated mechanism in place that's going to say, hey, some bad guy is trying to strip out SSL. He's trying to actually degrade what type of encryption we're forcing on the VPNs. So in most VPN devices, there is usually some type of configuration management going on. So if by some freak chance I get onto a Cisco box and I start adding other like endpoints to it, I create my own like point-to-point GRE tunnel. Is there something in place that's going to actually detect those automatic changes that are being made on, again, the ASA, the Cisco, the Juniper, whatever? So as soon as I fire up a GRE tunnel, it's going to say, hey, you know, someone popped your box, they've made these changes. Wireless is an interesting one. Again, this is more of an on-site thing, but how many people, I guess, would question the use of WEP and PEEP still? WEP or PEEP as a wireless deployment in an actual production network? Oh, I mean, how many people would still be surprised that they're out there, I guess is the question. Funny story with this. There are some consultants that actually still deploy WEP networks. And one of the most amusing story I heard was, well, if you give it a big enough key, it's just as secure as a WPA network. 32 seconds later, we were on the network, of course. But again, part of what we have to do, and again, due diligence, and I pick on this a lot, especially doing the red teams, it's just because you know it's there and you know it can be broken, and leaving it there because you know it can be broken, going after the cooler things. Due diligence. If PEEP is there, break it. If WEP is there, break it. Demonstrate the issue. It sounds like a lot of people would take that into account and just be like, yeah, we're going to do it just because. But you'd be surprised the number of people that just don't do it. It's like, well, it's low-hanging fruit. Well, what do you think the bad guys are actually going to go after first? The low-hanging fruit, just like everything else. MS-8067 isn't cool and sexy, but what are most pen testers going to use once they find it? The analogy should still be the same. It's like, well, MS-8067 is common that we use all the time. Well, why don't we go after the WEP and the PEEP still? Shoot. Sir. I'm sorry, what was that?
The hard part's going to create things hiding all the way, not just the code management, but the verifying properly managed.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it, depending on who you talk to, I mean, managed access control point, the key thing was, well, you have different access control points, and depending on what type of software you have on the network, those can also become access control points. Whether it's going to be soft or hard access control points. So even if they have multiple VPN controllers at different network segments, or even some of the internal PCs that actually have like stun VPNs on them, where they make dynamic managed access control points. Trying to define all those and leverage those during the red team test. It should be considered, should be actually executed on. Unfortunately, it's not always done that way. The part of the reason that why is because we have such we usually have such a short amount of time to actually execute the red test that you can't find all those like the soft managed access control points. Hard ones are easy to define, the soft ones not so much. But, sure. Yeah. From my perspective, yeah. I mean, if you're leveraging those organizationally allowed soft access points, and you pop one of those and that's how you get in, then yeah, and you're still going back to validating those controls. If they've defined that as legitimate access point into the network, and they're using whatever Web 17.3 here, whatever maps into whatever, then yeah, you should be testing it. If you know about it, they've defined it, and they're saying, we allow this on every PC. Well, that's cool. Now I have 4,000 systems I can go after, and they're all in scope because you're allowing this. I've already touched on the encryption one, so I'm not going to go into it again. Does anyone have you not know it, like the PEEP WEP thing? I think everyone here probably does, just based on all the giggles when I said it. Cool. So full disk encryption, whole disk encryption, whatever you want to call it. A lot of guys don't really take that into consideration. Even the organization's like, well, we don't really worry about it, or we already have it, so we're not going to include it. If by some freak chance, we happen to get into a building and there's like a crap ton of laptops laying around, we want to take those into consideration. We actually want to test those. I want to fire up a bunch of the laptops, see if they're actually all fully encrypted. Because if one's not encrypted, well, we know what's going to happen there, because all we need is one. Just like we only need one system to be compromised. So if you're actually physically in the building, there's a pile of laptops, start turning them on. Why? Because we want to verify this. Make sure every device is actually encrypted. All right, what can people do? So if we send someone an email and has like the cool like macro script in it, macro in there, it's going to push in PowerShell. They're going to do something. Do they actually restrict outbound traffic from user land? Can we just push it over whatever port we want to? Can it go over like 8080? Can it go over 8081? Can it go over whatever? But we also don't want to start going through sequentially just trying to guess ports going out using that vector, but do they actually have egress access controls in place? We obviously want to test that. Is one of a common like red team pen test. We still go back to the USB drives. We have the USB drops, we have the DVD drops, we have whatever. We drop some cool, mouse on the ground with something that we reprogrammed. So when they plug the mouse in, it does cool PowerShell stuff. Do they have any controls in place to restrict employees from bringing in outside devices? So USB is still the biggest one. If we have an employee that goes they found a USB drive outside, they bring it in, and they plug it in, does something happen outside of it executing? Or whatever's on that drive still being accessible? Common way around this is, as soon as you plug a USB drive in that the organization doesn't recognize, hasn't authorized, something fires up that actually encrypts the drive. Wipes it and encrypts it. Rather than having a bunch of cool documents there that they can open up and start seeing spreadsheets and how much money people make. Which of course goes into systems being compromised. Most pen testers actually use this vector all the time. I should say all the time, but it's a common tactic. How many people do OSINT? A couple. So we always go through what's out there. We want to go through all the PDFs, all the Word docs, all the spreadsheets, all the PowerPoints, everything that they post, because we want to look for cool and interesting information that we can use to get into systems. This ties into that. So when we're doing our OSINT, when we're doing those digs through everything on their website, there needs to be control in place that's going to limit what people can post onto the organization's public website. So are all the documents being cleansed properly before they're being put out there? Or is it just being left as organizational usernames and domain names being stored in the documents that someone like us or the bad guys are going to rip out there and start attacking the systems based on that information? So a lot of the organizations that we work with have security awareness programs in place, and it's a big buzzword. Hopefully everyone has been through their security awareness training, but a lot of them don't bring into effect like insider threat type training. It's the common, if you get an email and it's a Word document, don't click on it. That's like the majority of our security awareness training. It's not, hey, if you see some dude and he's like, or not dude, because bad guys are girls too. If you see some individual walking through the building and they start plugging like Raspberry Pis in the network and they duct tape it to the bottom of the table, that's probably suspicious. You should report that, and this is how you should report it. Define that entire path for them explicitly, detailing who they should be reporting to, when they should report it by, and why they need to report it, especially making them aware of the why, because a lot of people still don't understand the why. They understand that they're supposed to do stuff, but not why they're supposed to do stuff. So obviously when we are doing our cool like on-site physical break into buildings and talking to internal employees and trying to figure out where all the cool people sit and where the time they actually get here, what time they leave, those are obviously indicators of insider threats that we need to be training the employees on. So that's how we meet this. And I'm trying to blow through the controls sequentially, so if you guys have any questions, just stop me, or if it hasn't been fully covered, and I'll stop and try to answer it, and otherwise I'll just keep rolling through these things. All right. So as we're going through the systems and, we're adding accounts to this, we're compromising VPNs and whatever, we're making changes to all the stuff we do as pen testers. What's recording all those changes that we're making? Is there anything actually recording all those changes that we're making? Are all the security devices actually integrated into a centralized data correlation logging server? A lot of organizations I've been to, they don't. They have like VPN stuff goes here, firewall stuff goes here, the IT operation stuff goes here, and those three systems never actually see each other, so there's no correlation between those. So when something happens here, they usually don't know about it over here. So while they may be doing the logging and of the individual systems, they're not tying it together to see the big picture. So as part of the testing, we need to kind of help them understand why the big picture is more important than the individual logging. So they're beating some of the logging controls that we'll discuss later, but they're not actually bringing all those logs together. All right. So when they detect changes that are actually being made to the systems, what do they actually have to do? Are they required to actually do anything? Have they defined the path of incident handling, incident response? So once these things start coming in, as far as I've logged into your router, I've added routes, I've created new tunnels, I've added accounts to the systems, I've moved myself into better groups, more access. How is that coming back into the major system for the blue team to know what to do when they have to do it? And this is kind of going to tie back into general security awareness training. Incident response. Do they actually have an incident response program? A lot of the companies I've been to, they have incident response policies that say, you must report something when you see it. But then when they report something, it goes into kind of an abyss. So is there actually an incident response plan in the back end that the technical end or physical people, and I'm going to pick on later because, a lot of times we focus just on the tech stuff at these conferences. We don't really think about the physical security guys, but is there an actual overall plan for technical and physical? So when something happens, what's the actual requirements that you have to start following? What do they have to do once an employee actually reports whatever? Their CD drive is opening and closing. Their camera has turned on. There's some weird individual following in the parking lot. So all these things tie back into the incident response of once the employee reports it, what do they have to start doing? And of course, my favorite subject. Right. So physical is going to tie into pretty much like all the incident response type stuff. So do we have access controls at every entrance and exit? And I say that entry and exit because that's actually very important. Because most organizations only think about entry into the buildings. We're concerned with stopping people from getting into the building. We have the locks and the doors and the cameras and the guards, and they're stopping people from getting in, not from getting out. Which is just as important both ways, because once I get in and I actually physically steal stuff and I'm walking out with boxes, there needs to be some kind of control in place that's going to stop me from getting out. That's all going to tie back into their overall, physical protection plan. So, same control is stopping someone from in, same control is stopping someone from getting out. Someone has to be monitoring the system, just like the IT guys. They have their cool SIMs, whether it be Splunk or whatever. Physical guys need the same exact program. Something has to alert them that there's some bad dude or woman walking around the building, doing stuff, picking stuff up, walking out of the building. We want to make sure that, as the good guys, that there's no way to actually get to, if we have copper, fiber, whatever, is it protected? As the red team guys, that was one of my favorite targets. It's like, how do you want to really irritate someone? You take an axe to the fiber. Because when the internet goes down and there's a big axe cut in the fiber outside, well, that's a major impact to the business. How are they protecting it? Are they protecting it? Do they even realize they need to protect it? Part of the job as the red teamer is obviously to kind of exploit that stuff. Is there someone actually monitoring the alarms? One of the big ones I like to pick on is closed-circuit television. Cameras everywhere. Is anyone actually monitoring them? 90% of the time, no. It's just like the IDSs. If we're having an IDS and no one's watching it, what's the point? Emergency shutoff. You'll find them everywhere. Emergency shutoff for power, for water. If you really want to irritate someone, turn off the water for the entire building. There should be actual controls in place monitoring for that as well. So if by some chance someone actually physically makes it to those emergency shutoffs, whether it's for the power or for the water, someone needs to be alerted. Hey, there's some individual that's in the basement. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're standing outside the emergency shutoff valve. We should be alerting on that. Delivery removal. There's some guy here in a white truck, and he claims he has some stuff he's going to deliver here. Okay. I can't say the number of times we've actually used that to get into locations. We go down into Enterprise, we rent a truck, and we throw some fake stickers on the side of it that said, like, FedEx, and rolled up, and people are like, yeah, sure. And, it comes down to your physical protection plan. There should be some monitors and controls in place to not only log those, but alert on those. Are there deviations? Do we have normal times of deliveries to a location? If someone shows up outside of that time, we should be notifying that, alerting on that. Physical security personnel are showing up and asking for that input to identify themselves. Do the web developers actually do any testing before they push stuff to public? Obviously, the internal red team guys destroy this. External red team guys also destroy this. Majority of the times, they don't have, as much as it pains me to say it, and the whole OWASP push and web dev, OPSEC, there still is not a lot of testing done before custom or in-house built code is pushed out. So we obviously need to validate that. The external stuff, maybe they have some controls in place, but internally, we found the majority of the times there's just nothing in place. They don't bother because it's on the inside. And of course, if we walked in the door because we've said we're from FedEx and now we're sitting down, plugging pies into the network, that we're going to start tunneling through your network using OpenVPN or whatever, and just report the inside. So, do they do? What do they do? What is their framework? What do they claim to? If anything's actually being done. Yeah, a lot of times before the test would start, we'd straight up ask them, it's like, what's your development framework? They're like, oh, it's agile, that's great. It's like, what's your testing process? And, if there's a hesitation to answer, then you know what the testing process is. Then it's just, go through and at least validate it. It's like, yes, you have no internal or no external public-facing, code validation or input validation being performed. And it's common that we do that. It should be. We preach that. But for internally, obviously, it's where the majority of our testing nowadays is very PowerShell focused. We're always looking at, passing the hashes. We're not looking at the testing actual internal web applications. If you go to the majority of the talks at any of the security cons, it's like, what are the majority of the red team talks on? PowerShell. We don't really do too much web app stuff anymore. We still have a couple of classes that are like, oh, do the web apps, but we've lost focus on where the actual information actually is. It's like, the web apps have it. And if the web apps aren't being tested, or obviously input isn't being validated properly according to industry-defined requirements or recommendations, a WASP, that's where the cool information is. And it's even easier to get to it if the developers are being lazy and the organization isn't calling the developers on that. Some more stuff on the red team side that we should be testing. So once we're in the buildings, we have our footholds, we've elevated, we've now ramped up, and our boxes are there, and we walk out, and we should start destroying them inside. Just don't lose sight of what else needs to be tested outside of just the PowerShell stuff. And there's a lot of things that I'm not touching on here, or usually down at the bottom of it. And hopefully everyone's actually seeing a lot of these, but it's like these bullets here, stuff that we can't really test as red teamers or as pen testers or whatever. But obviously stuff that we should be recommending is that they're, as part of their vulnerability and remediation plans, or if you're from government, your POAMs, defining what their plans are, what their remediation timelines are, who's responsible for the remediation, stuff that we can't do, but stuff that we should be recommending. Because in the cool, ridiculously large reports that we sometimes write, that kind of stuff needs to be addressed, not just what the issue is and how to exploit it and how to fix it, but kind of detailing out the plan as well. This is going to apply more toward the outside side, boundary protection, looking from the outside in. So are there actual proper access controls in place? Have they defined the boundaries outside? Once we get into the inside, have they defined the internal boundaries? So if you pop a box in the DMZ, can you then start bouncing over internally because there's no firewall rules at all restricting access from DMZ to internal? We're kind of going through and trying to validate that, not just trying to look for the pinholes if they're there. So is it wide open? We can pretty much map that out. We want to do that as an afterthought, starting to trying to map that out to make sure that those rules aren't in place. Because we start trying to nmap entire internal network segments based off ARP tables, you're going to be setting off alarms. but usually as the wrap up for the testing. It's like, okay, we got into these systems, we used this to get into this. After testing was completed, we went back and validated that, there's no internal access controls between DMZ segment and inside, and this is how we did it. So again, just defining or explaining to them how the boundaries aren't properly defined. So SC7 we kind of touched on earlier, where we're looking at if there are multiple points of entry into a network. So if they have multiple points of entry, if for whatever reason they have one router, one location, one router, another geographic location, but those two segments are tied together, looking at how flaws in one segment will allow access into another segment. So, for example, I have a router in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have another router in Philadelphia. I pop the router here and make myself a tunnel, and then I tunnel back into a network here and find that I can get to, Atlanta, Georgia because there's no internal access controls. It's kind of pointing out that because there's multiple points of entry into the network and there's flaws in one, and it allows for complete internal compromise. For the data that's actually residing on the systems, how are they protecting it? Majority of the organizations now are starting to take database encryption seriously. Even information at rest, they're starting to just create containers, double the information in containers, and just leave those containers closed from not using it. They just want to get onto the systems and we start finding the interesting information, verifying or validating whether or not they're actually doing any kind of data at rest encryption, better access controls based on whether the information is stored. If it's sitting on a Windows share, for example, who has access to the share? Is it set to everyone? One of the easiest examples I can give. So just finding where the interesting stuff is and just validate who has control of it, who can access it, how it's being protected, if it's being encrypted or not. Do they have malicious code? Antivirus is common. Do they have it? Is it being updated? We obviously can test that. We don't want to because we don't want to start pushing bad code or, code that's going to be detected, at least not until after we've done our cool stuff. We want to verify that it's actually there, that it's being updated, that it's catching, the common stuff. So after we push our cool PowerShells and we get DA or whatever, go back and actually start throwing stuff that we know should be detected just to make sure that those things are actually functioning. Can't tell the number of times that, antivirus has actually been on a system, but it hasn't been updated in 10 years. The date was a little cold. I think it was 3 or 4 years actually. But if it's not being updated, it shouldn't even be there. There's no point to it. It's taking up processor space, memory space. So if it's not being updated, it needs to be called out. And it actually needs to be tested. And a lot of us don't actually do that type of testing when we're doing the pen test, doing the red team. So we pop the boxes, you do whatever, fail to encode it, push it out there, make sure it's not being detected, but we actually need to, once the testing is actually completed, go back and actually verify that everything's actually working. Make sure that malicious code is actually functioning as it's supposed to be. Right. So I've pointed out the SIM thing already. Do they have something in there that's pulling all the logs together? We did this as a fire talk. Someone said, well, what do you recommend? It's like, well, Splunk was my favorite. You throw it out there. It's pretty point click, literally. You dump all the logs into it. You want to make reports. You just say this, this, and this, and hit go. It's probably one of the easiest SIMs to use. It's probably one of the cheapest, outside of Security Onion. They need to have something in place. They have to have something in there to pull everything together from all the systems, especially public-facing and all internal critical systems. So if they don't have something there that's going to generate that kind of intelligence for them, the real-time alerting when someone's doing anything even remotely suspicious, it needs to be called out. And obviously, we can detail this really easy. We're popping boxes and no one's knowing about it. They need to be made aware of it. It can't just be, we did this, this, and this. It's like, well, you need better monitoring tools. You need better logging capability. You need better data correlation. All going to a single log source or to multiple log sources that are being pulled into one major log source, and then you're doing your analysis correlation there. And two controls kind of tie back into the last one. Again, it needs to be not really it can't really be historical based. A lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, they don't have the staff So it's always, well, we don't have the staff to deal with real-time analysis. A lot of the SIMs nowadays, it's going to allow you to have that kind of functionality. Once you start intaking all the logs in there, you generate all your alerts, whatever, just based off the information. Anything that's deemed as critical, send off your emails, your alerts, whatever, how you have it set up. But without the real-time analysis, again, it's kind of pointless. It's like having the video cameras that no one's monitoring. So unless your IR plan is going to be all historical based and dealing with someone to pop their boxes, Friday at midnight and you're coming in Monday morning now, it just needs to be brought to their attention. So do the systems actually generate alerts? Which is another one we used to find all the time. It's like their DMZ system, someone just decided to not enable auditing on the system. So everything was all the Windows boxes, for example, auditing was just no to everything because it was taking up log space. And no one in the past had brought it to their attention, no other auditors had found it. So just going through and verifying that auditing is actually taking place. So after you pop the boxes, as an afterthought, and you've done your cool stuff, go back and make sure that the systems are actually generating alerts. Are they generating alarms? Are the event logs actually being generated for me creating an account, me adding myself to the admin group, me starting new services? If it's not being done, obviously they're going to have issues with meeting these kind of controls. Outside of that, when someone pops their boxes and actually steals stuff, they're never going to know about it. All the cool splunking in the world isn't going to help them if the data's not there. Are they doing any kind of integrity checks, especially on public-facing systems? So when I go in there and I start replacing, adding run 32 DLL replacements or adding new DLLs, is there something that's going to say, hey, someone's making or creating new files, editing this, editing that? Is there anything actually being done to detect that? Is it being pulled into a central repository? Are there alerts being generated on it? So once we're actually generating the alerts, what's actually going to happen? So this is going to go back into the IR plan. So everything that we're saying, that I've been saying, or battling about very quickly, has to be tied back into the overall incident response plan. So as part of the incident response plan, not only dealing with end user land of users reporting in, hey, I clicked on this, or I opened up this Word document with the macro, blah, blah, blah. How is the IR team actually responding to integrity checks failing? If there were new files created, if files were replaced at 2 o'clock in the morning, does the IR plan actually deal with that? Second one is, what is their spam protection? Do they have anything? How often are the signatures on their spam whatever actually being updated? If they're using a semantic box, for example, how often the signatures being updated? Are they being updated? Did it go out of support a year ago and we just haven't bothered because it's just spam? And those kind of engines are going to be the ones dealing with the majority of our external phishing attacks. So when we're generating the Word docs with the macro whatever stuff in it, the cool things, if there's nothing there, it's going to keep up to date with the latest and greatest stuff. Their spam protection is failing. So the information input validation is already. They touched on this, and a lot of the controls are repetitive. I'm not sure why, but this is one of the ones that were. As part of the developer testing, development in general, they kind of touched on this, but I guess they wanted to bring the point again to make sure that it's actually being tested, or input validation is actually being performed. So are they actually doing proper filtering for when we're trying to do joins? Is there some mechanism in place that's saying, no, you can't do join statements in whatever, a get or a post? And then how does that all tie back into their incident response plan? So when they see a join statement on a post that shouldn't be going to a certain application, is it being alerted in near real time back to the IR guys? Error handling, another one that's part of just normal web application development. But they wanted to call it out again. How is error handling being done? Is it being done? What kind of errors are being presented to general user base versus administrator users? How are those users being how are the errors actually being generated to the specific individuals? Individual being an internal developer versus a general user. And of course, what the error messages actually reveal, if anything. Cool timing. Yeah. So there was a lot, and I'm sorry I threw 50 slides into 45 minutes. But there's a lot of stuff, and to be honest with you, I didn't really cover even more of it, because a lot of the controls that I kind of rushed through there very quickly were the minor controls. And the minor control was actually tied back into the major controls, and the major controls were paragraphs longer. If you've never actually read through the NIST documentation, it's a lot of words. It's painfully long. In a former life, we did a lot of government work with NIST. So I kind of built everything that I did kind of around that framework. So when someone wanted testing done, and how can we sell this? I tied it back to, let's look at compliance. And compliance has kind of got a bad rap, because we're all, obviously most of us are very technical in the room. So we're all hack this, hack that, and, but we actually want to sell the stuff. We have to go back to the risk management frameworks, the compliance frameworks, because that's what the executives, that's what they're more concerned with. The compliance officers who actually make the majority of the decisions, the CISOs who make the majority of the decisions, is going to come back down to, what controls are you going to meet when you do this cool, sexy pen test and pop all my stuff? And it's been the common theme that we're still trying to get across to everyone. So next time, again, you're trying to sell the pen test to the CISOs, to the compliance officers, to whatever executive it is. It's far easier to sell it from a compliance perspective, at least in my opinion. I've had a lot of success that way. If you disagree, cool. We can argue about it later, because I have 5 minutes left for questions. So I'll stop for now and take questions. Sir. Yes, semantic. We're still recording, aren't I? Yes, a lot of vendors are doing that intentionally now. They give you half the error message, and if you want the other half, you have to go into the console and dig 6 layers down to actually find it, and to actually get the full useful error message. If someone triggered and whatever that, you tried opening up this Word doc that was located on this drive in this location, you'll get the alert saying something happened, but to find out what happened, you actually have to go into the console. But a lot of vendors, they're doing that intentionally, which irritates me, now that I'm actually on Blue Team again, because it's this should be default. If I'm pushing code to a box, I should be able to see what code I'm pushing to a box in an error message. Because if I'm a Blue Team guy, which I am now, I don't want to have to spend my time digging through 6 different systems trying to find that, because it's a waste of time. I have better things to do. But yes. Anyone else? No, and there are a lot of talks about the RFID. Obviously, if you've been DEF CON, listen to the Lars guys. Every red team talk, I should say every red team talk, majority of red team talks are, always doing the badge thing. And the badges that they're talking about, even the vendors themselves nowadays are saying don't use these anymore because they're broken. But a lot of the resellers still have these things in stock, and they're trying to get rid of them. But honestly, if you're working with a customer who has the old, I forgot my badges. If you have the old style, I still keep them around just because the old style HID badges, the dual frequency badges that are going high-low, that are still easily clonable. One of the easiest things is just you get the shields. It's $1.50 that are FIPS compliant, that prevent the whole badge cloning thing. It's always going to be a viable, I shouldn't say always, it's going to be a viable vector for a long time just because the busted systems are out there and the vendors still have them. But even if you go to HID now and say, hey, I need a new system, they're going to go with ultra high frequency badges that right now you can't clone them. But everything that's obviously based on some algorithms to be busted at some point. But yeah. Yeah, and even it's going to be even come down to multiple layers. So if you have a badging system, don't just rely on the badging system. Something you have, something you are, something you know. Going back to the idiocy of just general old school IT. It's if you have a badge, that's great, but couple it with something else. Couple it with a PIN number. I can't tell you how many customers I've been to. It's I cloned your badge and it was useless. Because once I walked up to the badge reader and I badged in and the cool little light went green, then I had to either do the retinal, literally I had to do a retinal picture, or I had to punch in a code. So couple it with something. So do you like the badge readers, couple it with the retinals or with punching in a pin? Because then I have to then stand at the door or have like a long-range telephoto lens to watch what your employees are punching in, which also has been done, but then requires more time for me to sit outside there. Cool. Anyone else? All right, cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.